A very good morning to everyone. My name is Walter Sim and I'm the Japan correspondent for the Straits Times. It's my honor to be here today to moderate this panel discussion that I hope would provide some answers to some very important questions. Firstly, what may we expect for US-China relations going forward, and how will this impact other countries in the region? We all saw what happened last week, and despite projections of a very close race, Donald Trump romped to a big victory over Democrat challenger Kamala Harris and will return to the White House in January. The Republicans also have control of the Senate and will also very likely take the House. There has been a lot of doom and gloom in the media, but I believe, as Minister Chi said earlier, there should be some bright spots to expect under the second Trump administration, be it the US talent pool and innovative culture that might be set to continue in future. And of course, for small countries like Singapore, as Minister Chi has said, our choices and the outcomes will be influenced to what is happening around us. Of course, there is a lot of attention on how Trump will navigate geopolitics, no least in East Asia, where his first term was marked by US-China strategic confrontation. This time, he has already discussed the 10 to 20% tariff on imports from all countries besides China, and he also wants to slap a 60% tax on China. So helping us to make sense of it all today are four distinguished panelists. I have Professor Chen Ting, who teaches international relations at Jinan University in Guangzhou, China, on my right. We also have Ms. Selina Ling of OCBC Bank, the chief economist of the bank. To her right is Mr. Blake Berger, a consultant with the Asia Society Policy Institute, and he has also worked with Mr. Daniel Russell, who was the architect for East Asia policy under US President Barack Obama. And lastly, we have Ms. Bhagyashree Gareka, the Straits Times bureau chief in the United States. I thought to open the discussion with you, Bhagya, since you were personally on the ground covering the election. And what kind of struck me was, despite a lot of mainstream US media forecasting a neck-and-neck contest, you made the call pretty early on that Trump was likely to win. So what did you see on the ground that led you to this conclusion? And on top of that, could you give a sense to us of whether you think Trump 2.0 will be better or worse for China and the region?
Yeah, hi, morning everyone, and great to be here this time. And to answer your question, well, am I heard? Okay. So just to answer your question, I think I did make that call, stuck out my neck a little bit, but happy to share what led me to do it. It wasn't just, intuition or something. I was following the elections like everybody else, looking at the polls and everything, but what I was also doing is traveling around the country quite a bit. And I literally saw the signs of the Trump victory. I went to almost all 5 out of 7 swing states, the critical swing states, which either of the candidates needed for their victory. And I traveled through a lot of other states as well, and everywhere I did see signs, the Trump signs, everywhere. So it's his face you might see it on houses, on barns, on tractors, around everywhere. And then you'd see signs, his campaign from 2016. So Trump-Pence signs, and those were still around in people, not parting with them. They were still around in people's backyards. And then people I'd met basically would say that, oh, this is my T-shirt, and I got this from the rally, and this is my boots, my hat, whatever. So you could see that there was this fervor for Trump, which wasn't dying. And if you kind of listen to what they were saying, you also heard that they were basically repeating the words and phrase which Trump himself was using. So there was this big connect between them, he's speaking to them, and them kind of speaking for him. All that was going on. I did see it. And the other thing, of course, is I heard all that only after I learned how to speak to them in a way. Because as you know, distrust for media is rather high in the US. And I sort of got around it by saying that, I don't have a dog in this fight. And I'm from Asia, long way away. And basically, we're all very interested in your election. And I just want to know what do you find in him? What attracts you, and so on. So that after that, I think they were quite happy to share things with me. And then that was my second clue. So the kind of things that they were talking about. And then when I looked at the figures they were backing up, so I wasn't looking at the horse race, so to speak, Trump versus Biden or Trump versus Harris later. I was actually looking at things like, one, the job ratings of the administration in power, which was very bad. I mean, Biden had low down ratings all through, below 50% all through. That was bad. So bad for any incumbent, or bad for the person who was like an incumbent, meaning his vice president who was running. And the second thing was fairly standard question that's asked in American polls, which is the country going in the right direction? And again, the answer there was 70% of Americans saying to pollsters again and again that no, this is not right. We're not happy with what's going on. And the other thing is what matters to you in this election. So that's the other thing in the polls I was looking out for, and that's inflation. As we know, immigration by now, I think everyone's hearing this over and over. And in that, it was Trump ahead too. So, how could I not sort of, take my cues from there? And I think Kamala Harris kind of missed her. I think she probably regrets not paying attention to all those signs herself, and probably that's what, I guess my 2 cents on, how is it.
If I could ask a follow-up question to you, Bhavya. Given that Trump appears intent to blame all of America's domestic woes on foreign countries, on foreign issues, do you think Trump 2.0 will be better or worse for the world?
Well, that's actually $1 million question, isn't it? And I think what Minister said as well, we've got to wait and see what works, what plays out, right? So I think this morning he's just announced, or seems to have announced, not sure if it's confirmed yet, but Marco Rubio is going to be his Secretary of State. So that's an interesting pick. This man is a China hawk. And so I guess China is probably taking note of that. But he also has, he's been a senator for, I think, 14 years now. And he actually, if I'm not mistaken, introduced this law in the Senate that if Trump, US, wanted to pull out of NATO, then he needed 2/3 ratification. It wouldn't be very simple and easy for him to do that. So you can hear Europeans probably, if you listen, breathing out, like a sigh of relief sort of thing. So it's an interesting pick, and it tells me that he might be blaming things on outside world, but actually he blames American policy and politicians more. He says Americans did it to themselves. We kind of let, according to him, we slept while the world moved ahead, kind of thing. So on balance, is it good, or is he going to be good or bad? I think foremost that comes to mind is tariffs. And on that, we don't know yet what it's going to be like. But we know that this man is transactional by nature. And he's got this bubble of billionaires around him as well, right? So you've got Elon Musk there, big business in China. You've got, Blackstone, Schwartzman there. You've got a whole lot of other people, Jeff Yass, the TikTok investor. So will they help him see China a little differently? Will he see some opportunity in, there? So I think it's kind of open for all that. Nobody, I think, can at this point get ahead of events. But I think there's enough room to watch what happens. And actually, the biggest reason I'm positive, I'm a bit on the positive side, is this, as the minister said. He thinks good things are in store for the US economy. And if that's the case, it's probably a cue for the world as well. Usually what happens, and if things go well in the US, usually it goes well in the other parts of the world as well, with some caveats, but yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Bhavya. And Blake, turning to you, I wonder if you agree with Bhavya's analysis, and could you share whether you expect Trump to approach US-China relations any differently this time?
Thank you. Maybe I'll provide a little bit of the doom and gloom aspect to this conversation then. I think it's really important to look at his first term as really a harbinger of things to come. And, things shouldn't be taking us by surprise. We should listen to him and take him seriously. And, when thinking about this, there are 3 words that come to mind. And, we've heard transactional, but really also unpredictable and unilateral. And so this dynamic is even more acute now that a lot of the guardrails during his first term are now gone. The John Kellys of the world, they are not there anymore. Expertise has been pushed to the wayside, and loyalty now is really a determining factor in who advises him, which would not and does not bode well for stability. And so whether it's trade, diplomacy, security, I expect Trump to take a more hardline, competitive, and confrontational stance and approach towards China. Just take the trade, and with Robert Lighthizer expected to play some prominent role in the administration, I expect him to double down on his economic nationalism agenda and further the march towards economic decoupling with China. And so, that is towards the goal of addressing what he perceives as unfair and unbalanced trade flows, and what he sees as an attack on American prosperity, and towards the goal of bringing back U.S. manufacturing jobs. He's already announced that he'll seek to impose 60% tariffs on Chinese goods. He's called himself the tariff man, and so and that includes a range of other measures, including strengthening of export controls, limiting of Chinese investment, and also screening U.S. investments going into China. So, should Trump seek to re-engage Beijing, I would, expect there to be a good dose of skepticism on what could be accomplished. He may be transactional, but he's also unpredictable, and so, that also undercuts confidence in partners, including in Beijing and elsewhere, on what he would be able to actually accomplish there. On the diplomacy front, also his preference for personal diplomacy hints that the institutional mechanisms that undergird the relationship could be really disregarded. And his desire to use intermediaries and informal channels only elevates and increases the likelihood for misunderstanding and miscalculations. And in a relationship that's already fraught, that's very worrying. On the security front, I expect to see actually a more robust U.S. military presence in the region in order to deter Chinese activities. We saw the growth of U.S. operations in the South China Sea, and so I expect this trajectory to be continued and even increase in scale. But that should also raise alarms, especially if the traditional channels of communication are disregarded. So all in all, I expect him to be much tougher on China, and that really also aligns with domestic sentiments in the U.S. as well, which have soured on the relationship. So what does that mean for Southeast Asia? Really on the trade front, expect more protectionism. Trump has called for tariffs across the board at a starting point of 10 to 20%. He's also really signaled that he'll walk away from IPEF, so that's out the window. And that should not come as a shock, since he did this, relatively the same thing with TPP on the first go-around. So, Southeast Asian states should be really concerned about what that means for their trade relationship with the United States, and especially those with trade surpluses. Should the administration seek to implement reciprocal tariffs on states in the region, which Pete Navarro has called for, that would have a profound effect on developing countries in the region. So it should be raising signals. And that's especially for Vietnam, Malaysia, and Thailand, who all have significant trade surpluses with the U.S. And when thinking about it from their perspective, that would also leave them little room but to retaliate against those kinds of measures. And additionally, as a knock-on effect for the region, the increase of U.S. tariffs on China would potentially redirect Chinese excess industrial capacities and goods to the region. And so that's also signals concern in the region as well, as you begin to see states, especially we've seen in Indonesia, begin to raise their own protectionist policies. So shifting to ASEAN and focusing on ASEAN, Trump barely did that during his first term, right? So it should come as no surprise. He has largely a disdain for multilateral organizations. He only attended one ASEAN summit, didn't host a US ASEAN summit, and that really accords with his transactional, what's in it for me kind of approach. So if the US becomes further engaged and turns inwards, it poses a real risk of upending that kind of strategic equilibrium between the US and China and Southeast Asia that has maintained the balance here. And what that could lead to is facilitating greater Chinese influence in the region, and also undercutting the notion and role of the US as a dependable and reliable power, which only, as we know from regional surveys, is an existing regional trend line. So those concerns should be acute in the Philippines as well. But also on regional issues such as climate change. He's already signaled he's going to walk away from that, and that's a key concern for Southeast Asia. But going forward for the region, it's important to engage the US and not walk away. That means engaging Congress, business leaders, the executive branch, and thought leaders. It doesn't mean because Trump is in and he's not engaging ASEAN that the region should not be engaging as well. So.
I see. Thank you very much, Blake. And I thought it's important to get China's point of view at this point. And Professor Chen, I was wondering, how does China see the prospects of relations with the United States under Trump? And does President Xi, for instance, would he take a different approach to Trump as compared to in 2016? And how would a more hostile US policy impact Chinese foreign policy and its relations?
Well, thank you. Those are very big questions. Certainly I don't have answers to. But it just reminds me, actually about 20 years ago when I was still studying a PhD in the US, I came to Singapore for a visit, and I had to go to the US embassy to renew my visa. And the officer asked me the question, what do you study? So I said, I study international relations. So he asked, what do you think of US-China relations? And I said, in China, we always think, that's 20 years ago, okay? I said, there wouldn't be too good, there wouldn't be too bad. He said, that's a great answer, so you're passed. So that has changed. Half. US-China relations in the next 20 years will not be too good, for sure. But the too bad part is maybe it's getting worse and worse in a big picture. But maybe it's not as bad as the current US-Russia relationship. So it's somewhere in between. So that's the big picture. And about Trump, there are two things about Trump. Number one, we survived Trump 1.0, right? We survived, the world survived. If you look at China's trading number with the US, it actually increased, surprise, surprise, between 2018 when Trump started trade war and last year, 2023. And maybe because of COVID a little bit. So China's trading numbers with the US, still number one in the world as a country, but as a market, number three. Number one is here, Asia, and the number two is European markets. But don't forget, a lot of Chinese trade go to Vietnam, Mexico, and other countries. Then final destination is still the US. So as long as the US consumers need goods and services from China and the other markets, I'm a little bit positive this relationship will survive Trump 2.0 as well. But then the question is, it's not just Trump, right? Remember, Trump only has 4 more years, unless he changes the constitution, which is very unlikely. Then what would happen next? I think that's the bigger issue, because the Vice President-elect, J.D. Vance, is maybe representing the whole GOP view, and by the way, the whole US electoral view, because you see this red shift across the board, right, this time. That's why Trump won this time clear and cut. So we worry about the next 10 to 20 years. It looks likely that the whole country will be, like the minister mentioned earlier, more inward looking. That's more likely than likely. So that means a lot to China and to the region as well. But there is also good news, because the US started TPP, then everybody else regrouped after US withdrawal. And then now we have CPTPP, we have RCEP, right? US is not part of the two organizations. So other countries, my prediction is will get closer and closer, despite the absence of the US. But so one word about China-US relationship, I think, like I said, China survived Trump 1.0, and will likely survive Trump 2.0. Trump is the kind of person who is maybe more ambitious than competent. So we'll see. Another 2 years, when the midterm election comes, we'll see whether Democrats can take back the Congress. Then it's a whole, maybe a different story.
Thank you very much, Professor. And now turning the conversation over to you, Selina. We have heard a lot of analysis about the future of trade relations between US and China on this panel so far, but I was hoping to hear your view as an economist. Do you see trade relations, how do you see trade relations evolving going forward, and what do you think are the potential trade battlegrounds?
Well, thank you. As Minister highlighted earlier, US-China strategic competition is likely to persist. So, there's a saying, when elephants dance, the grass gets trampled. So the question is, who will be in the grass this time? I think what's different about Trump 2.0 is that he's not just targeting China per se, but 10 to 20% tariffs on the rest of the world will be quite punitive on top of the 60% for China. So that's one key difference. So in our study, we have tried to estimate what would be the impact on Chinese growth and also on ASEAN growth. So assuming that, tariffs really go to 60% for China, you're talking maybe about 1 percentage point shock to Chinese GDP growth, mainly because exports is about 20% of China, right? And then similarly, depending on whether it's 10 or 20% tariffs on ASEAN, the shock could be anywhere between 0.7 to 1.3 percentage points of growth. Of course, this is very simplistic. It assumes that the tariffs kick in from the day he gets inaugurated. He has no pushback from businesses, and basically he gets his way for 2025. So question is whether what will be the retaliatory moves that China or the other ASEAN members or the rest of the world, for that matter, would implement, and how would this play out? I think in terms of within ASEAN, Vietnam obviously is going to be the most impacted. Nearly 30% of their exports go to the US. They run the highest bilateral trade surplus in the region with the US. So the hit to their GDP growth could be anywhere between 2 to 4 percentage points, depending on whether it's 10 or 20% tariffs. Singapore is a little bit more unique. China and the US are our top two NODX markets, both holding about 17 and 16% in total for 2023. But we do have an FTA with the US. So it can be amended, but it really depends on how fast the amendments and what kind of amendments will take place to the FTA. So if we assume that it can be amended for the FTA, possibly we could be looking at growth being shaved off by as much as 0.4 percentage points if it's just 60% tariffs on China. And we may move down to about 2% growth if it's 10% tariffs on the rest of the world, including Singapore, and maybe to about 1 percentage point if it's 20% tariff on the rest of the world on top of 60% tariff on China. Okay, but I'm not totally pessimistic because I think if you read this recent book by Robert Lighthizer, okay, it's called "No Trade is Free." And I give you a quote there, which I think is very interesting, okay? He says that no one gives up anything valuable for nothing. The strategic use of leverage was essential to successful negotiations, okay? So my feeling is that all these numbers that are floating around, 60%, 10%, 20%, it's all an opening salvo. He does want to strike a deal with China, and depending on what he gets out of China, maybe he'll go a little bit easier on the rest of the world, okay? So in that case, it's really not all doom and gloom, okay? And I think the silver lining really out of all this is that there will be a greater push both on China to extend its soft power and cooperation with the world outside of the US, and similarly for ASEAN, I think there will be greater regional cooperation and integration. So ASEAN will have to become more resilient. They will have to work closely together to be like a bunch of chopsticks, not easily bent and broken if you're together rather than single. So I think there may be some positive outcomes from this multipolar world that we are facing. Thank you.
To Selina, I would like to pose one more question before I open up the floor to questions. Under the Biden administration, there has been a lot of discussion about things like economic security, about de-risking, about decoupling. Do you expect this to continue under Trump administration? And should the so-called Global South and other middle power countries take better note of this policy idea?
Actually, the de-risking is already happening. If you look at a lot of the MNCs, they are doing their China +1+N strategy. Even within China itself, a lot of the Chinese companies have, increased their outbound FDI, especially into the region, The model of the FDI, I think, will change over time. In the past, maybe, under Belt and Road initiative, it was really bring their companies, bring their investments, bring their manpower, everything. I think today, to try and get around some of the tariff scrutiny, probably they do a lot more of local partnerships, local incorporation, and to basically go a little bit under the radar from here. I think as far as all the economies around the world, I think there will be a big push to do a few things. One is to, of course, scale back a little bit of the direct exposure, I think, to some of the outright Chinese investments, especially in the strategic industries that are under scrutiny. This could be your advanced manufacturing, your chips, your solar panels, your EVs. Secondly, you want to broaden your markets and products to be a little bit less dependent on just the US or China per se. And I think thirdly, they will look for other avenues of multilateral or regional cooperation. So, my colleague just mentioned some of these regional initiatives that have come up, whether it's RCEP, CPTPP, etc. I think there will be greater impetus to look for other drivers of growth and trade that is not solely dependent on US or China.
So I guess there's a chance Trump may withdraw from IPEF then.
It's early days yet. We'll wait and see.
Bhagia, you have something to add?
Yeah, exactly. So about IPEF, yeah, I fully expect he will. I think he's pretty much said he would. And just like he did TPP, was it on day 3? So I think IPEF might be one of those things which can be done away with easily. But if you give me a second to just sort of defend my theory of the case, why he's not that bad. So he says that, tariffs are the most beautiful words in the English dictionary. So I say elections are even more beautiful word because, it's when he takes office on Jan the 20th, he's already a lame duck, right? He's a man who's limited term. So I think he will be looking to consolidate his legacy, and he cares about the economy. So I think there is a limit to the damage he will allow to happen, because if tariffs go forth in a big way, it will come back to bite the US consumers. And then 2 years later, you have the midterm elections. And, and then still 2 more years later, you have 2028 elections. So if he wants to, or if Republicans want to win that election, they've got to keep the economy and the ground sweet. So, there's a bit of I think, something built into that mechanism. And one final thing I want to say is that, the part of his being a lame duck also means that there are Republicans in the party who probably want to be the pro-trade Republicans, who want to be the, have a reputation to sort of reclaim. And probably on the Hill, you might see a bit of pushback against something very drastic or something that Trump tries to pull back. And I think the US businesses are actually counting on, and US lobbies are pretty formidable. I mean, as much as we in Asia kind of dread those tariffs, I think the US manufacturers, who after all source all these inputs from these supply chains all over the world, they also have something to fear. They're not looking forward to it. So they will, I think, impose that countervailing pressure. So, in the interplay, let's see what prevails. That's my...
Thank you, Bhagia. On that note, I'd like to open up the floor to questions. If anyone has any question, please raise your hand and identify yourselves. And I believe we have people around passing around microphones. Cheng Wei?
Hi, I'm Cheng Wei from the Straits Times. I'm one of the China correspondents. I'm curious perhaps to hear from panelists, how will the US-Taiwan relationship change under the Trump administration?
Is there anyone in particular you're directing a question to?
Maybe Blake, if possible. Thanks.
I think that's a large question. You've already seen him oscillate on the issue of Taiwan, but he certainly thinks Taiwan is taking advantage of the US in terms of semiconductors. And so I think it's a large question. It remains to be seen how the Taiwanese are able to connect with Trump in terms of personal politics in order to get him to make some commitments. But I think it's early days, and you've already seen him oscillate on this issue. So I think, the Taiwanese should certainly be concerned that he may try to reach a deal with Beijing or, something like that. But I think it goes with his transactional approach. If he thinks the US is being taken advantage of, then the Taiwanese may be in a little bit of a precarious position.
Professor Chen, do you have anything to react with regards to the Taiwan issue, which President Xi has said it's a red line.
We have good news. Because number one, Trump is not interested in conflict, especially military conflict. So for the rest, for the next 4 years, we should be assured, right? There will be no military conflict over Taiwan. So that's good news. Number two, maybe in a way, good news for China, because according to Trump's value systems, U.S.-Taiwan relationship is not based on values, which is often emphasized by Democrats. So like you said, all mentioned, Trump is transactional. He sees Taiwan maybe 80% as a bargaining chip, which is, in a way can be dealt with, right? So I think that creates a lot of uncertainties for regional actors here. And he already sees Ukraine as sort of a bargaining chip between Europe and Russia relationship. So from his perspective, it's all about negotiation, right? So I think, in that way, there could be some positive developments.
Can I just jump in? I recently came back from Taiwan, so spoke to some of the clients there as well. The Taiwanese are not sitting still either. If you look at one particular company, I think it's already out in the news. They are building a big chip plant in Arizona, so they are also laying the ground to have the U.S. administration stay vested in Taiwan as well, right? So all the players are involved in this game.
Right. Thank you very much. Any other questions? No show of hands? Over at the back.
Hi, it's Magdalene here from the Straits Times Hong Kong correspondent. In a similar vein, I want to ask about the Hong Kong, where Hong Kong stands in this, and whether you see things worsening for Hong Kong and the economy because of potentially being caught up in the US-China tensions. And this is directed to all of you.
Blake, do you want to take it first? Oh, Professor.
Well, I think it's the same, right? Because similar to the Taiwan question, for Trump, Hong Kong is not important unless it's a sort of a bargaining chip. It's not a value-based relationship between the U.S. and Hong Kong. But for Hong Kong's economy, it really depends on two factors. One, how much it can be integrated with the Greater Bay Area, which is where I'm from. Where we have this Greater Bay Economic Area concept. So, and second, more importantly, similar to Singapore, Hong Kong is all about the connectivity, right? Hong Kong as a port, as a city, as a lingual, multi-racial global city, it can play that role even better during the possible future of U.S.-China more decoupling. I think it really depends a lot on Hong Kong's own actions and initiatives.
Right, Blake, would you like to react to that?
I would say that question's largely moved on in the United States. I don't think that really plays into Trump's agenda at all. Even during when it happened under his first term, Hong Kong was a bargaining chip. And he's already signaled he would seek to end protections for Hong Kongers who are seeking asylum in the United States. So I think the question is largely over. I mean, if he would see it as a bargaining chip, sure, but Hong Kong's role is a financial center and a connector, and you've already seen Hong Kong is what was recently announced as the most dynamic financial capital in the world. So I think, for Hong Kong's standpoint, it's just further integrating into China, but I think the Trump administration has largely moved on from that question.
I would agree on that. I think I did come back from Hong Kong recently. I think the worries on the ground really is more about trying to strengthen the recovery story. Retail sector and hospitality doing a little bit not so well, mainly because the Chinese, tourism has really come back, especially in terms of spending power. A lot of complaints about, Xiaohongshu and more budget type of travelers. They do free stuff, Instagrammable stuff, rather than spending money on the ground. So most of the Hong Kongers will tell you all the youngsters all go to Shenzhen over the Fridays and weekends to spend and party there. Yeah.
And Bhagya, you wanted to say something.
Just to say that the pro-democracy and pro-human rights part of the US administration is over with Biden. So under Trump, you're not going to see that, and therefore Hong Kong slides down.
Right. Thank you very much. Any other questions, please? Right in front.
Where do you think interest rates will go from here?
Sorry, could you share your name and affiliation?
I'm Melvin from OCBC.
Maybe I'll start. Well, I think market's perception of Trump really is that because of all the deportations he wants to do, on the immigration front, that's going to hurt manpower cost. And also because all these tariffs, it's not going to be easily absorbed by the people that, the countries or the economies that he levies it on. So at the end of the day, some of it will be passed on to the US end consumers. So net, it tends to be inflationary, okay? And the thinking is that if that inflation comes up again, then the Fed may have less room to cut rates. So you can see that market pricing for the Fed rate cuts has really come off ever since the election's outcome. So the Fed has just cut again by 25 basis points very recently, but market pricing for the December rate cut of the next 25 basis point now is only about 60+%. So it's not a shoo-in. And then if you look at the cumulative rate cuts for 2025, it's dropped quite dramatically. Now, at best, maybe they're looking at 3 cuts or so. So it's really dependent on when the immigration and the tariff policies kick in, how fast, how dramatic, and whether inflation will go up again in the US. And then, of course, all this talk about whether Fed Chairman Powell will be removed or fired. Of course, Powell has said no, quite clearly. But, down the road as to is he going to make life a lot tougher for the Fed members, that's, of course, still up in the air.
Right. Any other reactions?
She's the expert, so I think pretty much she's wrapped up the whole thing. The only thing is wait till Trump actually comes in, which is basically what the Fed is doing as well, right? No big decisions forthcoming. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, over there, please.
Hi, morning. My name is Eugene. I run my own consultancy. My question is, as we see the US turning more inwards, do you see that in the next 4 years, China will play a more leading role in filling up that vacuum in terms of global leadership? We're starting to see blocs like BRICS kind of gaining more momentum. Do you see kind of the world order shifting and leadership shifting?
Right. Thanks, Eugene. Professor, do you want to take that first?
I think to a degree, it has been happening already in the last 6 or 7 years. That's why we mentioned the two organizations without the US, right? CPTPP and RCEP. There are also other players who are becoming more active. India, Australia, New Zealand, and so as the US, slowly, withdraws to itself, and other players, other than China, will become more active, including Europe. So I think it's a global pattern, which is in a way, I think several of us also mentioned, good and beneficial to this region. So ASEAN, I actually think will become more important, more resilient, and more active, because US is taking care of its own business, and we have to take care of our business. China would also definitely be more active along the Belt and Road, initiative. So I think those are the two, major global patterns in the next, I would say, 10 to 20 years. Again, this is a global political cycle, right? The U.S. became overly confident after it won the Cold War in the early 90s. No, it's been almost 30 years. It's a cycle. Now the new cycle probably already began. So we have to see whether it's a 30-year cycle or it's a 20-plus year cycle. But looks like that, at this moment.
But Blake, wouldn't the US regard all this alliance forming as sort of like ganging up against the United States? And how do you foresee the Trump administration reacting to that?
I wouldn't call it an alliance, right? The BRICS is an unconsolidated group. And I would also, temper expectations with the BRICS. It's not like China and India are aligned on a lot of issues here, right? So, it's not like you're going to see India all of a sudden cede ground to China in order to, proclaim itself as leader of the global South. Modi has already said that he wants India to claim that mantle. So I'd be hesitant to say that you're going to see dramatic shifts here. And that also says, we're also missing other regional actors, Japan, South Korea. All of them as well are concerned about the shifts in the international order. So I expect more middle powers, Australia as well, to play larger roles in seeking to maintain the status quo. China is also a status quo power. China also engages significantly in the United Nations. It may have a different vision, but I don't see you're going to see these dramatic shifts. And there's other actors who will play significant roles if the US walks out. China is not the only one in the game here. So I would be hesitant to say that you're going to see dramatic shifts. You would see a different US engagement, but I would say that, dramatic shifts in the international order, I'd be hesitant to say that would be on the horizon.
Again?
So may I play the journalist and actually ask Professor Chen a question related to this?
Sure.
And this is, to what extent do you see the weakness in the Chinese economy delay that shift, in the global order?
To what degree, yes. People like 5 years ago, a lot of the economists maybe predicted China would overtake the US economy by 2029, something like that, right? 5 years ago, before COVID. Then I think if you ask the same question today here, I could ask maybe the big room here, but my guess is it's been delayed to 2033, 35. Right, it's not a big delay. It's like 5 years. 5 years is nothing for a country, in terms of timing, but it's still a delay. For China, the two big headaches. One is our traditional engines of growth have kind of lost some power. The real estate, the internet, and the financing. Now we need to find the new engines, which are maybe AI, AGI, still emerging. Right, it's we're not really confident, and the Belt and Road Initiative has made a lot of progress, but still in the maybe early to middle stage. We still need 10 years or so to be able to rely more on the Belt and Road markets. It's not there yet. That's why U.S.-China trading volume is still number one for China's all trading countries. That will not change in the next 5 to 8 years. Despite whatever policies Trump or Vance or whoever, that doesn't change. U.S. consumers will continue to need to buy from China, Asia. So that's the most fundamental structure we're talking about. As long as that doesn't change a lot, that's why I said I'm not so pessimistic about China-U.S. relations.
Thank you.
Just a quick follow-up, and which would be then, when do you see China returning to maybe 5% growth?
This year is close to 5%, I believe, because it's already close to December. Maybe this year is 4.9. I think after 2 more years of domestic adjustments, we can climb back to maybe 5%. Maybe I'm biased, but it all depends on the technological developments in the global markets.
Can I also give some historical context to his remarks about not to be too bearish on US-China trade relations as well? Because if you look at Chinese exports to the US, pre-trade war, Trump 1.0, there was about 14% of China's total exports. After that, it dropped to about 11%. So maybe if much higher tariffs come into play, it can drop a little bit further, but it's still quite significant. And then if you look in terms of Chinese exports of labor-intensive products to the US, it's still about 20% of China's total exports, meaning that the two countries are still very interlinked despite all this trade bickers. And this really has not changed over the last 8 years or so, despite the Trump 1.0. So the peak was about 22, 23%, now it's about 20%. So I think when we talk about de-risking or decoupling, it really happens at a glacial pace. It doesn't happen overnight.
Thanks, Selina. I think we have time for about one or two last questions. Is there anyone with a question for our panelists? If not, I will abuse my moderator's privilege and turn to Blake and Professor Chen. In the first Trump administration, we saw how he kind of upset the diplomatic order by doing things such as reaching out to North Korea's Kim Jong-un. And of course, being based in Japan as well, that had a lot of domestic policy implications in Japan as well. How do you expect this lattice work of relationships that Biden has built up over the last 4 years shift under the next Trump administration? And do you think he would do anything outside everyone's imagination? What are the prospects of another, say, Trump-Kim summit?
I mean, addressing the question about the lattice work, the Biden administration truly laid down a pretty impressive, group of networks, mostly the Quad being a center point of that in the region. Yes, it was, kick-started under Trump, but it was the Biden administration that shifted it into being a public goods provider and not a security organization. And, it was the Biden administration that was able to really bring everyone aboard, even though, it blunted the kind of criticism of China, which allowed India, Japan, and Australia to really participate. I expect that to continue. That is something that I don't envision going away. I think there's concerns about messaging, especially if Trump goes off script and goes after China in those meetings. But don't forget, there's other actors here. India, Australia, Japan see a usefulness in the Quad. So I don't expect there to be a lot of surprises in terms of shifts within the kind of groundwork that Biden's laid. Now, for surprises, potentially. I mean, I would say Trump is a little bit of a wild card, to say the least. But could you expect another summit with North Korea? Potentially. But then again, I mean, no one saw that coming in the first place. So, I would say hold tight is really kind of the message here.
Right. Professor Chen, anything to add to that?
Yes, maybe there will be the second summit, but the consequences and the impact of the summit could be a totally different story. I think North Korea could be even emboldened during the Trump 2.0 era because, number one, most recently North Korea tested new missiles, right? The technologies, I think, improved over the last several years. And more importantly, Japan and South Korea will face a lot of pressure from Trump to pay their military spending and etc. So there will not be as a kind of a tight alliance as under Biden administration. So some in China actually, analysis say the Trump, the Biden administration is actually a lot smarter in diplomacy. So if we can predict based on the history, the Trump 2.0 administration will not be as smart as the Biden administration. It tends to use a lot of raw forces. It's not smart diplomacy. So I think North Korea could see a chance to, broaden its initiatives.
Great. Thank you. And as time is running out, I would like to invite each of our panelists to kind of sum up the discussion today with some crystal ball gazing. And really, I am just curious, in 1 or 2 minutes, could you predict what the world will look like in 2028 when the next presidential election will be held? Maybe starting from you, Balgia.
Okay, so I'll begin with just where the US might be. And I think after a lot of upheavals caused by Trump's unpredictable or chaos-inducing kind of policies, I do expect the US to kind of emerge well out of that, that up and down. And like I said, I do pin faith on elections as a correcting mechanism. And then the other thing is AI related. I think productivity gains will come through that. Everything that we know is changing so fast already, right, in almost all spheres. So that will play a lot of, that will determine a lot of things, how the economy is going and, how various sectors respond to that. In terms of US-China, where they stand, I don't see things becoming friendlier either way. I see them maybe struggling to reach to some kind of mutual adjustment. I'm just tempted to say that I do see a little bit of, pragmatism in Trump, as hard as that is to say. But the fact is that even during the whole, bashing everything and, campaign, he was printing the Bibles, if you remember, in China. The Trump Bibles that he was selling for a lot of money were being printed in China. So, things do go on, and I'm kind of bullish overall. Yeah.
Thank you, Bhagya. Blake, would you like to have a last word?
Yeah, I would say that, expect middle powers to play a larger role. I expect Japan, Australia, India, especially India, to play a larger role in Southeast Asia, being more engaged, more diplomatically engaged, more engaged within ASEAN. I agree on the elections and course correction. I think that's an important thing to note. But I think a lot of the damage to U.S. credibility because of Trump will be hard to kind of course correct. I mean, we've seen that in terms of ICS polling, that the Trump administration really had a damaging effect on U.S. credibility in the region. And as much as Biden was able to do a little bit of course correction, we saw that it's still 50-50 at the moment. So I would say that don't think you'll see dramatic shifts in the international order, but I think as a good thing, you'll see more and more middle powers play a larger and larger role in terms of maintaining regional peace and stability.
And Selina?
Well, I have 3 key takeaways. When it comes to the 2028 US elections, believe the betting markets, not the polls. Okay, that's for sure. Second key takeaway really is that, I do think that regional cooperation, especially regional integration between China and ASEAN, will continue to increase in the years to come. And the third one really, I think, which we didn't really spend very much time on, is the strength of the Chinese recovery. So, Chinese policymakers have been announcing in drips and drabs various fiscal and monetary policy stimulus. My biggest question really is that, is this going to be a short and sweet kind of a 16-part K-drama kind of episode, or is it more like a Chinese drama, that can run into like 60, 100 episodes, and then we really have to wait all the way till the end before we get the conclusion? So we still have to wait for that. So it's really, in the past, a vibrant US is good for the rest of the world, especially Asia. But I think increasingly, a vibrant China and a stable China is also very, very important for Asia.
Thank you, Selina. And Professor?
Well, I have 3 sort of predictions. Number 1, by 2028, we will no longer be talking about Trump because his last term and his successor, J.D. Vance, could be a different story, even though today he is loyal. And number 2, US-China relations will be worse than it is today, but not as bad as US-Russia relationship. So it's somewhere in between. So we can relieve a little bit 2028. And the third, more importantly, I think this region, ASEAN, including Singapore, will become more important and more resilient, mainly because US departing from the world, giving other countries a chance to take the leadership role. Of course, not just ASEAN, also India, Japan, you mentioned already. And but Europe will suffer a little bit because of the reliance on US energy and the lack of strategic independence. It takes time to build that. So we'll see, 4 years later when you organize this summit again.